When a young player gets drafted into the league, that doesn't always necessarily mean that they'll suit up for the team that drafted them. In fact, there have been many cases where a rookie decided not to play for the team that drafted him. There are several reasons for something like this to happen, and it doesn't just happen with rookies. We've seen it happen with league vets who have been making an impact on the league for years. Keeping that in mind, here are 6 NHL players who refused to play with their team. Zach Hyman. In 2010, 18-year-old Zach Hyman was selected by the Florida Panthers in the 5th round, 123rd overall. After being drafted, Zach decided to play at the University of Michigan, where he had 89 points in 151 games played. In the 2014-2015 season, which was his senior year, Zach notched 54 points in 37 games played and was named first-team All-American and a Hobey Baker Award finalist. Not too bad for being drafted in the 5th round. Looks like the Florida Panthers really know how to pick him. Unfortunately for Florida, when they drafted Hyman, they had just come off their 9th straight season of missing the playoffs, and by the time Zach had reached his senior year playing in college, the Panthers were still a struggling middle-of-the-pack team who only managed to get into the postseason 2 times in the past 12 years. That was not very appealing for a young Zach Hyman. So as Zach was preparing for his entrance into the NHL, he announced that he did not intend to sign with the Panthers, and luckily for them, instead of losing his rights, Florida was able to work out a deal that sent Hyman to Toronto, his home city. This turned out to be a great decision for Hyman, as he really broke out wearing the blue and white and became one of the Leafs' best and most reliable two-way forwards for the 6 seasons that he played there. Brian Berard. Picked first overall by the Ottawa Senators in 1995, Brian Berard never actually played a single game for the franchise. That has to hurt for Ottawa. Imagine signing Connor Bedard and you think your team is finally going to turn it around, but then he just refuses to play and you're back to square one. That would be brutal. Also, a little fun fact here, Brian Berard was the only American to be selected first overall by a Canadian franchise. The only other player who's done that since is Austin Matthews. Now for Brian Berard, he was coming into the league on a high with 75 points in just 58 games played with the Detroit Junior Red Wings in the OHL. He won the OHL championship under coach Paul Maurice and was ready to make the jump into the big leagues. However, the Ottawa Senators at the time were just a 3-year-old expansion team who were playing absolutely horrendous hockey, hence their first overall pick. They were finishing in last place every season, and in the 92-93 season, they can only get 10 wins through the entire season. So Brian Berard attended the Sens training camp, but the team decided to send him back down to further develop his game, and that did not sit well with the blue liner. So he requested a trade. For me, it was a little bit of an ego thing, Berard said. I thought I was pretty much ready to play as an 18-year-old. We went into Ottawa's camp and I had a pretty good camp. It really wasn't anything against Ottawa or its fans. The organization was just in tough shape then. Berard went on to say that he actually thought he was easily a top 4 defenseman on that team. Eventually, Berard was traded to the Islanders and Wade Redden was sent back to the Ottawa Senators. Fortunately for the Islanders, Berard went on to win the Calder Trophy in the 96-97 season, beating out Jarome Iginla. Eric Lindros. Now here's another former number 1 overall pick who refused to play for the team that drafted him. However, this one was a little messier than the Brian Berard Ottawa Senators situation. How was it messier? Well, for starters, before the draft even took place, Lindros came out and said that he would not sign with the Quebec Nordiques if they decide to select him first overall. Well, unable to take a hint, the Quebec Nordiques decided to select Lindros anyway, and on top of that, they made it quite clear that they intended to keep him. Well, that never happened, and this drama actually lasted for a full year. What was Quebec thinking? That Lindros was just playing hard to get or something? During that year, Lindros spent his time in the OHL playing for the Oshawa Generals and represented Canada at the 92 Winter Olympics, where he recorded 11 points and earned a silver medal. The following season, Quebec finally accepted that Eric will never play for them and put together a pretty epic trade. Lindros was dealt to the Flyers in exchange for Peter Forsberg, Mike Ricci, Ron Hextall, Steve Duchesne, Kerry Huffman, a first-round pick, and $15 million. Damn, that's a serious return. What's funny is if Lindros decided to play for Quebec, there's a possibility that he could have ended up on that Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche team, but that just wasn't in the cards for him. Pavel Bure. Now this may be the most dramatic one on this list. Pavel Bure, aka the Russian Rocket, was drafted in the 6th round as the 113th pick and entered the league in 1991. Not only did he quickly become the Vancouver Canucks superstar forward, but with his speed and lethal scoring ability, Bure became one of the more dominant players the game has ever seen. Locking Bure in on their roster was not only a huge deal for the Canucks, but a huge deal for their fans, as 2,000 of them were in attendance during his first practice with the organization. Spending 7 years with the Canucks, Bure was a fan favorite, putting up multiple seasons with 90 points or more. So how did this go sideways? Well, apparently he had been at odds with the Canucks management for years. Actually, in 1993, 5 years before Pavel refused to play for the Canucks, Bure actually asked to be traded. Obviously, they didn't listen to the request, but what really ticked Pavel Bure off was when somebody in Vancouver management made up a story that Bure threatened to stop playing during that 94 playoff run to the Cup Finals. Somebody from management planted that story. They said I threatened to not play and it really pissed me off. It's a lie, said Bure. Well, after 7 seasons with Vancouver, Bure got his wish and his time with the Canucks ended briefer than expected. He was in the final year of his contract and he informed the front office that he had no intention of honoring that final year. So, for the start of the 98-99 season, Bure sat at home in Russia, forcing his hand and hoping for a trade. Bure finally got the trade he's been waiting for on January 17, 1999, and was sent to the Florida Panthers for Ed Jovanovski and a first-round pick that amounted to Nathan Smith, who failed to register a point in 26 games played in the NHL. Bure went on to lead the NHL in goals during his first 2 full seasons with the Panthers. Keith Primeau. Keith Primeau played for the Carolina Hurricanes for the 98 and the 99 seasons. Prior to that, Keith spent his time in the Red Wings system as they drafted him 3rd overall in 1990. He spent 2 years in the minors, but made his NHL debut in 1992 and continued to play with the Red Wings for 5 seasons until they traded him to the Hartford Whalers in 97. Now that was a trade for Brendan Shanahan, who was going through his own drama at the time, not wanting to play for the Whalers. But we don't have time to talk about that story, so hit that like button and comment below if you want to see part 2 of this video. Now playing for the Hurricanes, formerly known as the Whalers, Primeau played well with back-to-back seasons notching over 60 points. He was fitting in perfectly, and the Hurricanes even named him team captain for the 98-99 season. However, after a year of being their captain, Primeau ran into a contract dispute with Carolina's front office that ended up with him missing majority of the season. So for a huge portion of that season, Keith Primeau sat out and had to watch his team from home, and eventually Hurricanes GM decided giving Keith a new contract wasn't going to happen. So they shipped him off to the Flyers for Jean-Marc Pelletier, a 2nd and 5th rounder in the 2000 draft, and the cherry on top, Rod Brind'Amour. Jack Eichel. Now this one's a little different, as Jack Eichel wanted out of Buffalo for reasons not pertaining to his salary dispute. The Eichel and Sabres story is so much more heated, and because it recently happened, it was all over the internet, updating us minute by minute. Let's start off from the beginning to give you a little more context. In 2014, the Buffalo Sabres selected Jack Eichel 2nd overall. A pick they were ecstatic about, as Eichel was the type of player who could jump right into the NHL. He was more than ready to go toe-to-toe with the game's best. He had an unreal first season, finishing with 56 points in 81 games and was named to the NHL All-Rookie team. Unfortunately, the next 2 seasons, Eichel ran into injuries, but Buffalo did not lose hope and gave him the captaincy, showing their faith in his abilities. Another way they showed their faith in him was inking a deal for 8 years worth $80 million. In the 2018-2019 season, Eichel notched 82 points in 77 games, and then in the following season, he notched 78 points in 68 games played. In the 2020-2021 season, Eichel was limited to only 21 games due to a neck injury, and this is where all the drama began. Eichel had herniated a disc in his neck during a 5-2 loss to the Islanders. Initially, he was slated to miss 7 to 10 games. Eichel traveled to an independent specialist to determine the severity of his injury, and the doctor suggested a surgical procedure no other NHL player has undergone before. Artificial disc replacement. The Sabres officially ruled out Eichel for the entire season. Sabres GM Kevin Adams said the plan was for Jack to rehab until May, and then they'll reevaluate the situation, holding off from any surgery. But when the time came for reevaluation, it was determined that Eichel still needed surgery, but the Sabres organization disagreed. The Sabres wanted Eichel to have a fusion surgery, while Eichel was saying he wanted the artificial disc replacement. Eichel gave the team one more chance to change their mind about letting him do his desired surgery, but the franchise did not budge, so it was clear Eichel would never play in a Sabres uniform ever again. It took until November for the Sabres to settle on a deal with the Golden Knights, not because no one wanted Eichel, but because the Sabres were asking for 4 first-round picks, and that was way too steep for anybody to give up. Eventually, the deal worked out to Eichel being traded to the Vegas Golden Knights for Peyton Krebs, Alex Tuch, a 2022 first-round pick, and a 2023 third-round pick. After all that drama, I think both parties are happy with how everything turned out.
Thanks for watching our videos. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.